Hello everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of This Nintendo Life. My name is NBZ, and we're here to talk about The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild in all its spoiler-filled nature. Joining me, as always, is our Japan correspondent, Bally. How are you doing, Bally?
I'm very good, NBZ. When people hear this, I will be in Japan, but currently I am a week away from going to Japan.
I'm sure you're excited about it.
I'm absolutely pumped. I should say that I need to apologize for how long it has taken me to beat this game so that we can record this special episode, because it has taken me a long time. We're now at the middle of July, and obviously the Switch came out in March, so I've played a good 115 hours or so of this game, and I've got a lot to say, but that's why it's taken so long. I've just done loads of other things, and finally, I'm ready to go.
Well, it's good that we got it before the end of the year, Bally. So I'm happy for that. But there are plenty of people who took their time with Zelda, because it is, especially when you have a full-time job and you're trying to play other stuff on the side as well to keep up with this. It's hard when the game is this huge and ever-expanding.
And it was nice because there were a lot of people who came sort of back into the end of the game just as the DLC was coming out, and that's something I've also picked up and done a little bit of, but not a ton. So it was nice that the internet sort of came around again to this game when that DLC hit, and I'm sure it will later in the year as well.
Yeah, it's kind of actually a good time to be talking about Zelda now, because a lot of people are playing it again, so makes sense. Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll see. But yes, we should preface, before you go into this episode, we're going to spoil the shit out of this game. So if you don't want to hear anything about the story or the dungeons or any of the stuff that is specific to this game, a lot of this game is very easy to spoil, because so much of the wonder and joy of Breath of the Wild is discovery. So generally, if you just haven't listened to anything, that's probably a good idea.
I would also say that in my time since beating the game and going back and listening to Spoilercasts and things, I have learnt something new every single different video or podcast I listen to. In each one, someone has said something where I've been like, oh, I've not done that, let's do that. And it has been spoiled for me in a way, but I'm perfectly open to being spoiled on any minute things I've not found out about yet, and then going back and doing them, because otherwise I might just miss them entirely,
Sure, exactly. There are some things which are kind of obscure, and it's not likely you'll find them on your own. So absolutely, that is the case. So here it is, your final warning. If you do not leave now, then you will be spoiled on Breath of the Wild. All right? And let's go. Okay, so Bally, we're going to kind of break this down in a few kind of sections. We'll probably be a bit all over the place, honestly, because lots to talk about with this game. But how about we just start at the end, because that's kind of, cutting to the chase here. You go to Hyrule Castle and you face off against Ganon. First time I saw the beast form of Ganondorf, or Ganon, should I say,
is it even a beast?
I mean, it is, right? It's
like a demented, you know the good old Warhammer and the Chaos Army.
Sure.
Like some beast from the Chaos Army, it felt like.
So it feels like this amalgamation of parts, especially because a lot of his attacks are based on the sub-bosses that you face during the dungeons. And he also has a guardian laser, but he does feel like a spider monster almost, with all these different things attached to him.
How did you get to him, by the way? Which was it? What was your preferred route through Hyrule Castle?
Yes, the Metroid Prime-esque map of Hyrule Castle, which I'm sure you loved when you saw that for the first time.
Oh, so good.
So yeah, I had explored Hyrule Castle before. Was this your first time when you went into the final area?
I'd been essentially to the wall, to the gates before, when I had maybe 30 hours into the game. So I'd seen the blue Hyrule Castle map, the Metroid map.
Right.
But at that point, I didn't actually go into the castle. I just went away. I then came back at the end of the game, 100 shrines in, so not all the shrines, but most of them. Defeated the game, and then after that I came back and went on the internal side of the castle to get stuff like the Hylian shield, and exploring all the corridors, got the shrine inside the castle, which we can talk about later. But yeah, when I came back to defeat Calamity Ganon, I literally just stayed on the external shell of the castle and went on the simple route up the middle, where you never go into the castle once, and you go through two gatehouses to fight Lionel's, and then the third one you're basically at the door and you fight Calamity Ganon.
Yeah, so that first time I fought that Lionel was actually relatively, not early in the game, but it was when I was getting the final photograph, final memory, and I just found myself in that gatehouse and like, shit, I'm up against this Lionel, which is, I think, the most powerful Lionel at that point in the game. And the Master Sword, thankfully, whenever you're in the castle, because there's so much like, what's the gooey stuff called? Blight something? Well, you're a bad person to ask about this because you don't remember any names. But, the fucking gooey
it's got a name I've heard, but I've forgotten it.
But when you're around that stuff, the Master Sword is permanently glowing. So everywhere in the castle, the Master Sword is just on fire. So I just wailed the shit out of that Lionel and managed to beat him relatively easy compared to a lot of the Lionels I'd fought up to that point. But you can also
use Guardian arrows.
No, I was going to say you can use Guardian arrows just to make them disappear, which unfortunately means you don't get any of the spoils because that would be a little unfair.
The whole point of Lionel's is the spoils. Why would you want to shoot it with a Guardian arrow?
Yeah. So, so I'd been through those gatehouses before, but my final approach was kind of going through the underground area to begin with, where one of the shrines is, the only shrine inside the castle. So I took that route up through the library and up through all these other areas, and eventually found my way out the top and just kind of sprinted past a lot of the guardians into the entrance at the top. So
the inside is infinitely easier to traverse and fight the enemies of than the outside because of the number of guardians that are just everywhere. It feels like there's multiple points where I was just sprinting along the outside and there'd just be like 4 or 5 lasers just all fixed on me at once. And even though I had loads of guardian arrows, I'm not like in a position where I can be in a safe place and shoot them all. Like, you do have to be stealthy if you do want to try and defeat the guardians. Otherwise it's just better to run.
Yeah, I think, deliberately for a reason they put them all there so that when you're coming there in the early game, if you want to, you're intimidated as shit and you're like, how the hell am I going to do this, right? Like, that's kind of the point. And I think it's very effective at doing that. Although I was decently well prepared when I went there the first time, but there were still moments where I was like, oh god, I only have like a couple of guardian arrows at that point in the game when I was trying to find the memory. But yeah, Ganon himself is just... He reminds me of like a Dark Souls kind of Bloodborne monstrous thing. Like, it's probably the darkest, most twisted version of Ganon that has been seen in a Zelda game to this point. Honestly.
Yeah, definitely.
And I thought the fight was pretty engaging. The thing that is a little bit of a problem with this game is, I think, the nature of you getting more powerful and just slowly over time gradually getting everything sorted is, by the time you get to a lot of these bosses, they kind of become a cakewalk. Like, I rolled in there with all the weapons that I'd stored up in my house and all these food and potions that I'd cooked up, and I had the Master Sword ready and everything. And all I did was basically use the Master Sword, and, I had Daruk's protection, which helps for certain parts of that fight, like the laser reflecting back and stuff. And, generally, a lot of the things you build up from going through have made that fight a little bit easy to get through. Like, it wasn't a challenge, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
As epic as it was.
It's tricky how you decide to balance a game like Breath of the Wild with stuff like that, because they obviously want you to be able to beat this boss at any point in the game. Obviously it's a lot harder to do it early on. Even a third of the way into the game, I think it'd be very challenging indeed.
Well, it depends on if you do the dungeons or not, right? Because however many people you do is the amount of damage that gets taken off his health, as well as if you're going to fight bonus bosses
tricky, though,
at the start.
Say you've done a third of the game, like define a third. Say all that third was doing shrines and none of the dungeons. You might have more health and more stamina, or you might have upgraded your armor more. It's tricky to decide what actually helps the most in this final fight. I agree with you. I really enjoyed the fight. I think that I like that it mixes up its moves. And this is an area that we've discussed previously off mic briefly. Was so you said that you were very good at sort of deflecting lasers. So
I wasn't very good at it, but that's the option that I chose because I think the dodge system is bullshit.
He shoots the Guardian lasers. I've not actually to this day deflected one yet. I've not actually tried.
You should try it out, because if you just find a Guardian in Hyrule Field, just stand there for a bit and look at it, and I think it's either a sound trigger or like a visual trigger, but when it starts like you see the like
Yeah.
build up in the eye. If you hit the button, then I think that's when
Right.
it kind of deflects.
Yeah, and
back.
it's just a knack, which is funny because I've not tried that knack. I might be good at it, I might not, I don't know. But when it comes to parrying and sort of dodging out of the way of attacks and then getting the slow-mo hits on enemies, when it comes to Lionels, the guardians that you meet in shrines, the final boss as well, I'm like bloody amazing at that. Like I can do it almost every time. I can do it about 8 times out of 10 without getting hit. And I just really enjoy that mechanic in this game and how they implement it in the final boss.
Yeah, see, I can't agree with you at all. I just think that mechanic doesn't make any sense. And there's a video there's this 2-hour like breakdown, teardown of Zelda done by a YouTube guy called Joseph Anderson, who is, I think, known for being quite contrarian and critical of a lot of games. I disagreed with a lot of his points, but I think he makes some interesting assertions about that system and how it doesn't actually make any logical sense in terms of when you're dodging, it's not so there are points at when the dodge activates when you were never going to be hit by the move anyway, essentially. And when you try and move at a point where you are going to be hit by it, it doesn't activate. Like there's this weird inconsistency in the logic of it. But that aside, you should watch that video about it.
I do argue that it is consistent when it comes to its timing, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to repeat it. And I agree with you that sometimes someone might take a swing with a spear from a mile away. You do a backflip, and all of a sudden you're in slow-mo, and you're like, well, that wasn't going to hit me anyway.
Sure.
And other times, the timings of certain attacks, like for example, when a Lionel charges at you rather than just swinging stationary, the timing is completely different. And like that's another knack that I had to get used to, but I think I have gotten used to now. But that knack of the timing on that situation is far different to like a stationary attack, for example.
Right,
but,
absolutely.
Like there's balance. I overall love it. I just think it's a real great way of rewarding someone who's really worked on it and like worked on fighting in this game. And like if you obviously like not getting hit in this game is such a big deal when it comes to your defense and the amount of game you've played to build up that defense. So having it in the game makes sense to that degree, where pros can come in just completely naked and start doing parries all over the place and
oh boy, yeah, speedrun stuff is pretty crazy because I know you watched a speedrun on YouTube.
Yeah.
I actually watched the Games Done Quick speedrun that
what was their time?
It was 45 minutes.
Yeah, the one I watched was really cool.
Yeah, it was a really cool run. Some crazy stasis shit that goes on in order to get off the plateau.
Yes.
And stuff like that. But
just like how fast you can get to Hyrule Castle from the plateau by being on rocks and catapulted, and then the second you land to like spawn an Epona using an amiibo as fast as possible, and then ride to the gates. Oh, so cool. Yeah, well,
anyway. We can talk about that stuff at a different time because speedruns is a very interesting facet of this game. But
yeah, ending of the game.
Yeah, so after you beat that Ganon boss, then you go into the kind of beast form, which is more of a spectacle than anything else, and I think a lot of people have been critical of it because it's not necessarily challenging.
Was any of this spoiled for you before you fought it?
No, I had no idea any of this was coming. So when I beat Ganon, I thought, like, that's it, that's the end. But then there's another form. I was like, oh, shit, like my horse and everything, and you jump on it.
You didn't think there'd be another form? I was surprised that there were only 2 forms.
Oh, really? Yeah, I mean, I guess with the history of Zelda, you do expect, like, especially with Twilight Princess is probably the worst offender with 4 different forms.
Right.
Wind Waker has, like, 3 different puppet Ganons and then the main Ganondorf. So, yeah, you're right. Zelda generally, in recent times, has had that. Although Demise in Skyward Sword is only, like, 1, I think. But you do fight Girahim, like, going down before you fight Demise.
But I had only been spoiled on the fact that there was a phase on horseback. I don't know where I'd seen it. I just saw someone on horseback on the final boss, but I didn't see the final boss. I didn't see the first phase. I didn't see like the boss of the second phase. I just saw the fact that you did a phase on horseback at all.
Right.
So I was just
that was a complete surprise to me because I was like, what? Okay.
Yeah, but it's a great second phase. Like I was. It's a bit confusing at points.
Yeah, I think both of us enjoy it for the fact that it's more of a spectacle than anything else because it's not challenging.
Yeah, it's not that hard at all, really. Yeah.
But you're right, it is a little bit confusing because, well, it's my own stupidity, but I didn't straight away equip the Bow of Light, so that was me fucking up real bad.
I was like, my shots aren't doing anything.
Yeah, and then I equipped it, and I was like, oh, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do take a little while to show up those spots.
Yeah. And then there's like a final sort of gash in the beast that you have to shoot, and I didn't realize you had to, vault off your horse, get the wind, and then shoot from there. I was just trying to do it on horseback, but Zelda sort of says like, glide in the wind or something.
Yeah, some like poetic
why didn't
line.
I think of that,
Yeah. But yeah, I think overall, here's the thing: there's no kind of twist ending or anything crazy that goes on. But I really thought it was a good spectacle to finish, and I think it's just a very strong, like, ending kind of moment to that game. Although the cutscene stuff at the end, I wasn't a huge fan of. I don't think it really wraps up the game super well. And maybe we'll get more closure because it seems like the DLC is going to be taking place after this stuff anyway. So it could be left open. We do hear like Zelda is going to Zora's domain to talk to Mipha's father about all that stuff. And then there is this throwaway line that people have picked up on regarding the Zelda timeline of all things, that the sword is no longer talking to Zelda. She can no longer hear the voice in the sword, which you can interpret a few ways. It could just be, a philosophical thing just for the ending of that game and everything. But it could also relate to Fi from Skyward Sword, who was the voice of the Master Sword, and who kind of came into being, I think, because Demise existed. And so with the idea that this Ganon is basically just this pure form of rage, and he's basically, Zelda says he's not trying to reincarnate anymore at the end here. So people have been speculating that this is basically saying, this is kind of the end of the timeline. Like, no matter what timeline it is, it's kind of the end. Ganon is dead and gone, or Demise or whatever is dead and gone forever, and it kind of breaks the chain almost of... Because at the end of Skyward Sword sets up why all the Zelda games you're fighting Ganon is because there's this perpetual thing throughout time. There will always be a Triforce holder of Zelda, Link, and Ganondorf, holder of the three. And this feels like it breaks it.
I was a little disappointed that there wasn't a twist. I thought that also I was disappointed there wasn't... Calamity Ganon is like the least interesting Zelda sort of final boss or enemy, however you want to describe it.
Right, because he has like no motivations or anything. No motivations. Just anger,
it's just like,
basically.
It's just like an angry cloud, essentially. And I was surprised that Ganondorf doesn't appear in this game, and I think that when it comes to the character of Ganondorf and reveals, and even the Zelda reveal and stuff like Wind Waker, I just think other Zeldas have done the story of the Triforce better when it comes to how it all works. But when you're talking about how do you put on an end slate, to the timeline, and if that is the case with this game, I think it does a decent job. Like, the problem this game has is that it's such an epic game that how do you even come up with an appropriate ending? What are you meant to do?
Yeah.
And I think that maybe with this ending they were slightly hedging their bets, and that's understandable considering where they might want to go next with either the DLC or another game way down the line that links in some way. We don't know, but I just think that it would have been nice to see Ganondorf, but I can understand why he's not there.
I think it works from the sense that the story of this game that isn't the explicit narrative is essentially Link has to get stronger so he can beat the big angry thing, right? Like, that is the narrative so far as gameplay goes. And from that perspective, I think it works just because, like, you are building yourself up constantly until you are confident enough that you can go and face down this big challenge. And so I understand why they decided that would be viable, especially because there are a lot of like permeations that can go on with the different like forms of the dungeon bosses that can appear and everything depending. So I think it would have been hard to create a more unified ending if they tried to fit him in.
I do think that with the memories and sort of the biggest twist arguably in the plot is sort of like why Link was away for 100 years, and like you do find out the reason, and like he is like injured and they have to resurrect him because he is the chosen one essentially, and that they know they need him to defeat whatever's coming, so therefore they have to put him in the resurrection chamber. They clearly like show guards coming in like picking him up, don't they? Of like,
yeah, it is. So that's the final memory that you find out on the field of dead guardians, which actually took me a little while to find. And so I don't know if you experienced this throughout the game at all, but there's a glitch that a lot of people were reporting with the Blood Moon, where the Blood Moon would just constantly happen, like every couple of minutes, and it was driving people insane. And it happened to me multiple times throughout the game, and I was very worried at some point that it would like glitch my game and stuff. And I don't know if Nintendo's patched it or not, but while I was out there on the field, the Blood Moon just would not fucking stop, like 3 or 4 in a row, and I was like, God, I'm just trying to find this fucking memory. Anyway, that's an aside. But yeah, I think that's probably one of the better cutscenes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the memories are great, but the flaw in them is that the story they're telling isn't a particularly interesting one, to be honest. It's mainly sort of just hinting at the relationship between Link and Zelda, which is fine, and that's interesting to some degree. But in terms of like an overall plot, other than the final cutscene, which describes why he went to the Resurrection Chamber and why this whole thing is taking place 100 years later than the memories, there's not a whole lot going on. And
yeah, I just think a lot of them don't have any substance at all. Like, the one with the frog is cute and goofy, but what does that achieve aside from maybe building up the relationship between Link and Zelda a little bit? And then there's one where they're sitting on the top of the kind of Goron area, all these Lionels dead in front of them, and they just have a bit of a chat. And then there's another one where in the Gerudo town where she's being chased by people, and then Link defends her, and that's kind of it. And I'm like, okay, like, none of these really achieve anything of telling you stuff about, like, the wider kind of, you know, implications of what happened in this previous world. The ones that I liked were the one where she's with her father in Hyrule Castle, and you see their relationship. You know, the one where she's, like, angry and pissed off at Link at the shrine, stuff like that. Because that gives you a better insight into who Zelda is as a character, and why she is kind of not willing to go along with the quest of mythology that has been passed down to her.
Yeah. And I enjoyed the one with the champions. I believe it might be the first one, and it's one of
the
when
they're kind of crowded around in a circle.
And that's very sort of Fellowship of the Ring sort of thing going on with all the races.
And I think the reason ones like that are more effective is because you have more than just Zelda talking at Link with no response. That's the flaw of a lot of these, I think, is when it's just Zelda and Link, it feels weird because he can't respond because he doesn't have a voice, right? Like, it's just awkward in that sense. Did you ever find Zelda's diary in the castle? So when you go to find the memory, the castle memory, if you go into the alcove over that bridge, that's kind of Zelda's study almost, as it were.
Okay, yeah. I think I saw the study, but not the diary.
Yeah, if you go in, you can read her diary. And it's really good. I think, so for me, a lot of the strong writing in this game comes from the non-spoken stuff, like the dialogue that you get from NPCs and just the diaries that are just scattered. Like the one that I talked about that's at the top of Pura's tower. If you go all the way up to the top there, you can read about how she got, like, her age shrunk down and why she's like a child, essentially. And it fills in a lot of gaps about what happens with Link and stuff in the Resurrection. But Zelda's diary essentially talks about, like, why Link doesn't speak. Like, it basically gives you the excuse for why he doesn't talk is that he feels like he's very kind of burdened with this responsibility, and he needs to be very self-serious about it and needs to, like, button himself up. But he's also kind of shy, and she writes about, like, trying to get him to open up, and says eventually, like, he does open up to her and, like, does have kind of, you know, conversations with her. But I just found it funny that they discovered a way to justify in the story why Link doesn't speak, despite us all knowing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm happy with them trying to justify it, but
yeah, I mean it's a good thing to do. It actually does fit in with the narrative better than just saying, "Hey, this is how the Zelda games are. We don't want Link to speak," you know?
Yeah, perhaps. So. Anyway, shall we move on to sort of some of our favorite shrines, towns, characters, parts of the game?
I think a lot of this stuff is kind of intertwined. I still think Gerudo is my favorite town in the entire game.
Like town or dungeon or
I just think the whole area,
area?
honestly, I just think the whole area is a fantastic showpiece for a lot of what is amazing about this game. And unfortunately, I think it shows up a lot of the rest of the game. Particularly when it comes to the main quest, because the Gerudo one is so damn involved that it makes other ones look lazy by comparison. I know, lazy is a bad thing to say when it comes to game development, but it honestly feels like they put so much time and effort into this one area, and then you get to the Rito, and it's like, okay, I'll shoot 5 targets. Well, we're off to fight the Divine Beast now. You've proven you're good. And it feels so whisked away.
Yeah, which is I find that one especially such a shame because the Rito are right next to the Hebra area. There could have been some sort, not necessarily a tribe or something, but something going on in those mountains that you had to interact with and then come back to the Rito village. Because the Hebra region, yes, there are some great shrine quests that link to the Rito town, but they could have just linked that to the Divine Beast. It was surprising that wasn't a link like it was with the Yiga clan and the Gerudo.
Yeah, especially because the bird who you come across, Tabo, whatever his name is, no one remembers because he's in the game for literally 5 seconds. He's a white Rito, and I think they could have done some cool stuff with trying to track him down in the snow, him being like concealed in it or whatever, stuff like that. And yeah, they didn't. But yeah, the Gerudo stuff that I really loved was the fact that you get there and the first challenge is even getting in, right? Like you can't get into the town because it's a female-only entrance, so you have to figure out the way to get the clothes and go back and forth. When I found out about surfing on the walruses, I was like, holy shit, do you have like different traversal options for every area? Like my mind was racing when I got to Gerudo because I thought for every single aspect of this Gerudo, I hope they've done this for every single town. And it's kind of crushing when you get to the other ones and you find out, no, there's no real walrus equivalent. And there's no, like, sub-quest once you've beaten the Divine Beast to get this special item. Like, the idea that even after the Divine Beast, you can do 5 or 6 different side quests in Gerudo Town to get the Thunder Helm to have permanently on you was amazing because it really gives you that incentive to actually go and do the side quests outside of the rewards that they give you individually. So yeah, just the whole going to the Yiga clan. That was the thing that I was talking about, by the way, when the first ever episode we did of Breath of the Wild, when we were discussing our
I've done
impressions.
Something really cool.
Yeah, with the banana, with the stasis, that's inside the Yiga clan, and I had so much trouble just trying to get this one guard to move out of the site that I wanted him to go, and I just couldn't throw the banana far enough. So I was like, I'll just think of this thing where I stasis the banana and hit it a bunch, and then it goes far enough, and it was just so great. It was so funny. And it worked, and that's the great
thing
part
with
of this game.
This game is that I did a perfect anti-clockwise loop. So I went Zora, Goron, Rito, Gerudo, and I was really happy by the fact I did that order in the sense that it meant I got the Master Sword halfway through the game. For example, I think the Zora dungeon is probably the easiest. Well, it depends. They do scale.
I think Rito's probably the shortest.
Rito, it's quite short. And actually, the Zora dungeon did take me some time to get used to, and I actually really enjoyed the mechanics of that dungeon with the water and the camel.
It's cool.
Are probably my 2 favorites.
The camel is by far the best dungeon for me.
Yeah, the camel definitely is the best dungeon. But I'm worried that there will be lots of people who did what you did, MBZ, and they go to Gerudo first.
Yes.
And there's not any reason why you would or wouldn't go to Gerudo first.
Sure.
It's just, it's southwest. People might just randomly go southwest.
It's actually pretty easy to get there because you can just on the snowy part of the plateau, you can just jump off and glide into that valley and go through pretty simply.
Exactly, and that valley only leads to one place, which is the desert. So
yes,
so I'm worried a lot of people will play this game, do Gerudo first, and then do the other regions and think, well, Gerudo was easily the best. Why didn't they do that for the others? So I'm glad I was able to do it last in that sense. Where, and I really, really, from an artistic perspective, loved the look of Zora's Domain. Like I just thought, it's like in this valley, and it looks great. I think the designs of the Zoras themselves look great.
Especially like with the sharks and stuff on their heads, like it was really going for it.
Yeah, really, really great. And like obviously I absolutely loved the Rito. I thought that
give me your first reaction when you hear that music kick in when you walk into town,
It's
because that was the thing that I was waiting for you to get to.
I love Wind Waker so much, and I love Dragon Roost so much, and to just hear that music in this game in that town is just so perfect, and I'm just so glad they did it. Like I love the design of that town. I think it's a fun area. It's a decent dungeon. Like I said, it's a shame it doesn't link more to the Hebra region.
Yeah.
But I really, really appreciate that they went with that song and that theme for it, because I think in a game that's where the music takes such a back seat in the sense that it's very much atmospheric music. There's no like big grand themes that come in when you go to a certain area, unless of course it's maybe like Hyrule Castle at the end of the game.
Yeah. Boy, the Hyrule Castle music is just outrageously good.
It's fantastic.
It's so good.
But yeah, I was really pleased with the Rito area. I think that the weakest was the Goron, and
I think the Goron, the lead up to that dungeon, is by far the worst part of the game, because it is a escort mission, and goddamn, there were moments where he just got fucking stuck underneath those propellers, and he doesn't automatically move afterwards. He just fucking stands there. So if you are not fast enough to like get him to move again, he's just going to trigger it again and again and again, and the fucking fire just rains down from the sky and just destroys you. It is absolutely horrible. It's probably the worst part of game design in that entire game. And especially there was this one moment where it looked like, okay, there's this like circular area, and there's one light going around the circle, and there's one light in the center of it, right? And I was like, okay, so he's probably just going to pathfind and walk around the circle like I do. So I do that, I get to the other side, I use stasis on the one that's moving so that it stops while he goes. I'm like, okay, along you come, you're good to go. And what does he do? He walks straight through the fucking center under the light in the middle. And I'm like, oh my god. Like, it was just the worst. And I honestly didn't like the Goron dungeon that much. I thought that it was a neat idea just opening with the darkness stuff, but that aside from that, it wasn't really super complicated. And I was also surprised by the fact that both Rito and Goron really only had one thing you could change. Like, you know, Rito was like left, right, and center, or three, I guess, and then Goron was just like left and right, like super simple. The thing with those moving dungeons was I wish they had been as complex as the Gerudo one, because that is by far the most interesting in terms of design, and the others just don't stand up to it in terms of using your brain to figure out how to manipulate the environment.
Yeah, definitely. Overall, I mean, what's so great about this game is that beyond the towns we've talked about, there's towns like Hateno and Kakariko, which are both incredible. Like, Kakariko is just like this tradition. They really went for like this traditional Japanese village. And then obviously Hateno almost feels a bit like a castle town. Obviously it's nowhere near the castle, but it's sort of like a generic, more traditional European town, you might argue.
Sure, and it's like, it's very built in terms of its geography, like the kind of central area that you can almost shield surf down. Like, it's very vertical is what I'm looking for.
No, and there's the seaside town in the southeast.
Which I found quite early, actually, because if you just glide down from Hateno, it's pretty much right there.
I took ages to find that. Like, not ages, but I was past halfway in the game before I found it. There's just so much. So I just really love the towns in this game. Like, I think that it's before we really saw the final couple of trailers, we had no real idea of what the towns would be like, and I think they absolutely hit it out of the park. Like, I think these are easily, most of these towns are some of the best towns in any Zelda game. Like,
some of them I don't think they didn't meet my expectations, maybe. Like, the Goron one is fine. I think it's okay. I don't think it's big. The thing I like about the Goron one is, like, you have the Daruk and stuff, like, almost, what's the famous American, Mount Rushmore, like Mount Rushmore into the side at the top there. You can see their faces, like, etched in the stone. That's cool. The Rito one was weird for me because, so here's the thing. When I was looking at the memories, because I did a lot of these quite early in the game, I looked at the picture of the Hyrule Castle one, and I kind of assumed that one was the Rito village for whatever reason. I just thought the Rito village is going to be like this more like built up town for whatever. I don't know why I did, but so when I got to the Rito village, I was maybe a little disappointed because I was expecting something else.
I was
I
too.
still think it's cool. It feels a little bit. So the thing with like Zora and Rito, and even Goron to an extent, is like they're good towns. They feel just a little disconnected. They don't feel like towns. Like they just feel like, struts and stuff put together. Zora especially is like that because it's just kind of this stuff in the middle. Whereas the thing I really love about Gerudo is it's this very condensed, tight town with walls and barriers and everything. Like that's the thing that makes it special to me.
Yeah, definitely. I was disappointed with Rito in the sense that I knew that Rito were in this game. Like I'd heard enough about that spoiler-wise. I just thought that like the second I realized Hebra was like this mountainous region to the northwest, I just thought that they'd be up the mountain,
Right.
like with like snowy peaks and things like this, and they're like right at the bottom of the mountain. I was like, why are they way down here? And I guess obviously it's closer to the other towns and maybe for networks and stuff. But if you're all flying people, why not be way up high in the mountains? I don't know.
Well, they can go there if they want, I guess.
They can go there if they want.
Hebra's cool. There are some like fun things like people living out in Hebra.
Really
and
cool.
stuff like that. Maybe we can move into more shrine stuff because there's one shrine in particular up on Hebra which is very cool, and it involves using a snowball to create a shadow, cast a shadow. And that's one where like there's this diary that's been left by someone who clearly explored up there and stuff. And you have to wait until a specific time of day where the sun is in a certain place. That's a lot of shrines, actually.
No, that's when it comes to the snowball. It's actually in the Gerudo Highland region.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Man, okay, I guess these snow areas are just getting melded into my mind.
A little bit. But there's quite a lot of them in this game, actually. But
well, a couple, I guess, if you count Gerudo and then Hebra.
You got Gerudo, Hebra, but you've also got Mount Lineru.
Sure, yeah, that's another one.
And the main central snowy peak on the plateau, although it's very small.
Sure, yeah, that is more of a microclimate.
My favorite shrine was you have to shoot an arrow into the sun at like a certain time of day, and like I did this, I did it without a guide and stuff. There were a couple where I did have to use a guide. This was one I didn't, and I was just so chuffed that I got that. And it's in the Gerudo Highlands as well, actually. And there's just some shrine quests like that, and obviously all the Kass quests are awesome in this game. Like maybe apart from the Red Moon one, I wasn't a fan of that. That was
so the hilarious thing about that is like I get there and I'm reading his diary because his diary tells you everywhere he's going to be in the entire game. Essentially, like if you read his diary, it says those are all the shrines that he's basically looking for.
It was the last ever shrine I did.
Really?
Yes.
Was it the last one you found, or did you find it earlier?
No, it was like the fifth last one I found. I did the other four. The second last one was where you ride a deer.
So had you not been to the Thunder Plains yet by that point?
Sorry?
You had not been to the Thunder Plains by that point?
I had, because there's other shrines there, but I hadn't been.
Did you do the main Thunder Plains, like moving the orbs to the central area?
That was like the last 20 shrines I did, yeah.
Really? Okay.
It's really hard. How did you do it? Because I used stasis on like certain angled rocks, and then I'd line them up and then just attack them, and then they'd fly up. But I also tried to use Octo Rock balloons, but
nice.
That backfired a bit just because I couldn't find the perfect spot to use them on.
Okay, yeah. I was mainly using stasis, just stasising and then arrowing to get them down from the high areas. And then there's to get it up onto the like raised area, you can't really like run with it because you'll drop the ball, and it's also raining, which is a pain in the ass. So you have to like
all your metal weapons to charge up the stasis just ruled out. Or you can I did use them. You just have to be careful and
you just have to unequip them quickly, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was a really cool area of like taking all these different elements and putting them into a space where you have to really figure out how to get that sorted. That was cool because it's an area that stands out in the game visually, I think, because it looks like a bunch of mushrooms. It looks like a mushroom village.
It's one of the more alien-like areas. Almost.
Yeah, it kind of gives me Xenoblade X vibes.
Yeah,
maybe Monolith Soft helped out with that area.
Yeah, they were like, oh, let's just chuck this in from that game.
Yeah, basically. No, that was a cool one that stood out.
Were you going to say something about the Red Moon?
So the Blood Moon one was literally I found out all his areas. So what I did a lot of the time was taking screenshots to remind myself of stuff. I did this a lot with recipes and never ended up making any of those recipes because I thought like, I'm gonna have to know these recipes for later. So I took screenshots of them, but I never followed through. But with the diary, I was taking the screenshots to remind myself like where I needed to go for the other Kass quests. And when that was done, I talked to Kass, and he was like, when the blood is moon and whatever his riddle is, and he's like, when you wear no clothes or whatever. And I look up to the sky and there's a blood moon. So I just take off my clothes, jump down, and it's done. So I literally just did it there and then. So I got lucky, I guess, with that one.
I went to the dude by one of the stables who tells you like what the moon's going to be. I used him.
Okay.
I used him to harvest shooting stars, like star bits,
Right.
for a while because I was doing all those upgrades. I can talk about later, but I went to him and I had to like sleep maybe 20 to 30 times to like, get him to be like, oh, the moon is going to be like, he says something specific about it being red and something tonight or something. And then I was like, finally. And this is like, I'm on 119 shrines at this point. I'm just like, I just want to get this done. Just
man, that sucks. I guess
it
might have been the last shrine for a lot of people because of that reason.
And my second last shrine was also a Kass shrine. It was the deer shrine.
Oh, I love that one so much.
This is one where spoilers like hindered me in a way with this one because I'd seen loads of people. So loads of people were posting two images specifically on Twitter that were spoiled for me. One was the fact you could get Darklink outfit.
Okay.
So I knew that existed in the game. I had no idea how to get it. I only got that today. Like I was just
crazy.
saying off mic. The other one was that people kept taking pictures of themselves riding on the undead horse that is ridden by like undead bokoblins at certain. If you're on like a plane at night, there's a chance of an undead horse coming and they're riding on it.
I think they spawn in specific areas, like near the Hebra Labyrinth is where I found one.
So when Kass is like, oh, you need the one with the skulled. It's not skulled.
Crowned.
It's like the crown of bones.
Yes.
It says bones. I'm like, right. I'm gonna need one of these horses to. And there's millions of deer just running around all over the shop, and I'm just like making time pass at night trying to get one of these things to spawn.
Oh no!
And then I'm like, maybe I should just do one of these deer, and then so I just take the deer and then take it there. I'm like, oh, why didn't I think of this before? Like, it was just such a stupid scenario where I'd seen an image on Twitter and just got carried away that it was part of a shrine quest.
Right, because of the word bone being used.
Yeah. The second I saw the word bone, I was like, right. Anyway, so
that's really funny.
Second last ever shrine.
Yeah, no, that's one that I really enjoyed doing because I basically went there directly after the Blood Moon one because it was one that I'd read in his diary as like I'm going to be on this place basically, and I was like, oh boy, these deers are really hard to mount because I'd mounted them before. I'd taken a couple of pictures with them as well. I'd mounted the female deer like quite early on in the game, and then the male one I'd never done before.
You can mount them when they charge at you. That's the thing. You just time it.
Yes, right. If your button timing is correct, you can do it.
Because I was wearing my stealthiest stuff, and it still like heard me and started charging at me. And I was just like, oh,
dude, they are so sensitive. I spent the better part of 20 minutes trying to get them, and then what happened was, and I think I talked about this in an episode, was rain started happening, and it masks your footprints better. So that was the thing that finally pushed me over the edge to get it. But it's like, oh yeah, stand with the deer on top of the shrine and it opens. Amazing stuff. I really like that. I think my favorite shrine in the game is one that you had to end up looking up, and I kept going on and on about to you, and it's the one in the Rito area, which I think has probably some of the best shrine quests. The one with the with Kass's children, the 5 like girls that you have to go around and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
But the one I'm talking about is the one Rito who points up and says, oh, like my grandfather talked about this tree and going there and all this stuff.
And the white bird.
The white bird, and he saw a white bird from there. And so you go up to this tree, and you're looking for, like, where is this white bird? I don't know what, is it going to spawn somewhere, or am I going to catch this bird, or do I have to kill this bird, or what? And I looked back at the quest and it said to the southeast or whatever. It was a direction. And I looked to the southeast, and from that vantage point, the environment is built so that it looks as if there is this giant white emblem of a bird in the environment. And I was like, oh shit, like using the environment in a visual way. Something like, it kind of reminded me of like Monument Valley almost, where it's using multiple parts of different environments to like patch over one another to create this image. And you see like what is this shape of this white bird, and you just glide down to it. And the wonderful thing about it is, as you glide down, you see the glow of the shrine that is hidden underneath it. And you go straight into it. And that was one of my favorite parts of the game, just in terms of like the specifically design stuff, not in terms of like the weird like open world physics stuff. That was a great moment.
I had absolutely no idea that there was a shrine inside Hyrule Castle. So
yeah, that's one that took me a little bit to figure out as well.
So I beat the game, and then I had about 20 shrines left, and I go back to Hyrule Castle looking for the Hylian shield. All I know is that I looked up that the Hylian shield was in Hyrule Castle. I didn't look up where in Hyrule Castle. I just explored all the internal caverns.
Did you do any of those quests that you get at the beginning from like? So the first 2 quests I ever got in this game were go to Hyrule Castle to pick up
I
this
got
bullshit.
those too as well.
Yeah,
I've not actually done either of those yet.
No, neither have I. I need to go back.
But I was just like wandering around aimlessly in Hyrule Castle for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then I just see like some like this. It's like a fire pit essentially. I'm just like, well, I might as well light the fire pit. Let's just see what happens. And then all of a sudden a shrine just appears. I'm like, wow, I was not expecting that. And like, it's so good because it's one of the last few shrines I had to get, and because it's actually in Hyrule Castle, it's a bit awkward to warp to and things. So like, I'm so glad I made it appear because you can't just warp to it. It's complicated to get in and out.
Yeah, totally.
Those,
I mean, you can get there from the under area, like it's the dock area basically is where that is. And I actually went in there relatively early in the game, like accidentally.
In terms of like shrines where it's based within the shrine, so like mechanics within the shrine.
Sure.
My favorite was one that involved the name has 2 bombs in it or something.
Yes.
I want to say it's near the Gerudo Highlands or somewhere. And essentially, there's a number of rooms where it's about setting off both your bombs at separate times. But in the final room, to access the spirit orb, you have to set. There's 2 catapults facing each other that catapult in sequence. In the middle, between the 2 catapults, is like a cage, and there's a switch inside the cage, and the switch inside the cage starts up like platforms rising to get you up level with the spirit orb. But there's a door blocking the spirit orb, and you have to be risen like up on top next to the spirit orb and then set off the bomb again in order for the door to open. So you're basically having to break down how do you hit the switch twice within this cage when you need it to do 2 separate things essentially. So what you actually do is you put 2 bombs, one in one catapult and one in the other, and the square bomb gets caught by the cage and sits inside the cage. I think you then set off the square bomb while the circle bomb is still swinging across the gap. By setting off the square bomb, you go on the platform and you rise up. The door is then shut outside of the spirit orb. And then while the circle bomb is catapulting back and forth, you just have to time when you release it to make sure it hits the same switch, because you're only using one switch. And I just thought it was just such a great, mechanically interesting puzzle. And like there were just so many of those in the game. I'd also highlight like the electrical ones that are mainly in the Gerudo region. A lot of those shrines.
Did you see the crazy Twitter video that Nick Robinson uploaded, which got a bit viral?
Did it involve just lining up like a series of loads of metal weapons?
Yeah. So it was in the Gerudo dungeon, and in order to get through a door, instead of going and getting this metal orb that he needed, he literally emptied his inventory and just made a line of weapons on the floor, and the electricity just chained through them. And
it's so good. And like I did that, not to that degree, but I used loads of long ass metal weapons in one of the shrines.
There was one shrine in particular where I needed to just use a weapon to complete a circuit.
Exactly. And like, because there were only a limited number of other metal objects in the shrine, like blocks that you were using. And then the game was like obviously almost forcing you to use long metal weapons in order to connect up these circuits. It's just really great design.
One of my favorite, like, just normal shrines was the one with the ice block, where you have to carry it through all the gauntlets.
Yeah, that's fun.
It was a tough one to figure out, and especially because at first I picked it up and it was just melting, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? and I realized that I had a fire rod on my back. So when I was picking it up, just because I had a fire rod on me, it was just melting the ice block no matter what I did. So I had to unequip that essentially. And then there's one section where there's just fire falling from top to bottom, and you have to lift it up with magnesis or something.
Yeah.
But in order to get the block through, you need to get that through as well. It's really hard to basically figure out a way to get it through without getting it burned. And so what you have to do is like stasis the ice block first, then use magnesis to lift it and hope that you've shot it in the right direction where it'll just slide through underneath.
Oh, I fucked that bit somehow. I just sort of
really?
I just sort of quickly went out of magnesis, picked up the ice block, and it sort of landed at an awkward angle, and I just zoomed over to that. I think I mucked it up somehow. But
well, that's this game.
I saw a guy online, a YouTube video, using Octorok balloons, just picked up the ice block, Korok leafed it in the direction of the spirit orb. When it was over the spirit orb, shot it with an arrow, just ran around the system without holding the ice block, got there, and it just beat the shrine.
That's really good. There are so many crazy things you can do in this game.
So many.
One last shrine that I kind of remember was one where you have multiple steps that every time you hit the switch, they switch off going up and down, basically. And for the longest time, I was sitting there like, okay, how many things do I have that I can use? Okay, I have 2 different bombs, so I can set those off separately, so I put those at different sides. I have my arrows that I can use. Like, can I shoot an arrow over and get it sorted? And I just went through, and there were like 5 different steps, but I only had like 3 different ways of hitting the thing each time. I was like, what the fuck do I do? Like, how do I do this? And there was also a laser in the room, and I realized, oh wait, I can pick up this laser eventually. So I pick up this laser, bring it to the thing, and all you do is you just stasis and unstasis the laser. So it hits it and then stops, and it hits it and then stops. I was like, oh man, that's fucking crazy. And that really blew my mind.
The way that the Sheikah Slate allows you to do like bomb, stasis, magnesis, like those 3 things by themselves, and sorry, obviously Cryonis as well, those 4 things, I should say, give so much scope to what they could do with these shrines. You can just do so much crazy stuff. And obviously they want you to do specific stuff in some of these, but you can just break the specific stuff they want you to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
Come up with another way. But then you can also bring in external items from the rest of the game, like you were saying, with the long metal weapons to help you.
Right.
Or bring in fire arrows and just... There's a few where like you have to light up different torches by spinning it around like a
block, yeah.
Spinning around
there's
a block
like water
in
that
space.
turns it off and stuff.
Exactly. And I was just like, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to stand at the side, shoot all these with fire arrows, and it worked. Like it just, you don't have to ram your head up against a wall thinking I have to do this shrine without any help or anything. Like there's certain things you can do that can help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's basically whatever works best for you at that given moment in time, and most of the time it works. And it's fun like looking back at old shrines that I did and trying to figure out, because I was over at Ali T's place, a good friend, old pal that we mention all the time, and he's more early on in the game. And we were doing one of the shrines where there's a conveyor belt and lasers going across, and you have to like block it to get this ball over. And we were basically just spitballing ideas at one another, because I couldn't really remember how I did it. So, we're just going back and forth. And it's really fun as a kind of co-op game almost to just throw ideas back and forth and see what works, and kind of, get there in the end. So that was really cool. And another thing that I saw with him was something which you have never seen before, which I found out, I think, accidentally on the internet, but is one of the coolest things in this game, and it's related to late president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, because there's a character in the game who kind of looks like him, and a lot of people have speculated that he was put in the game deliberately as a kind of memory of Iwata, and he kind of tells you about the secret up on the mountain. The mountain itself is called like Satoral Mountain or Satori Mountain, I think. And so if you go there at a certain time when there's this kind of glowing light that emanates, there is this like grand beast. Well, yeah, you should have gone there then, Bally. There's this grand beast that's called the Lord of the Mountain, and it is the best mount in the game. It is the fastest, like Basically, it has the highest specs of any horse or creature you can ride. Unfortunately, you can't keep it. No, you can't tame it. So that sucks. So it's kind of like bears and stuff like that, and deers. Which the first time I wrangled a deer, I tried to take it to a stable, and they wouldn't let me. So I was disappointed by that. But yeah.
Have you ridden a bear yet?
I have never seen a bear in my 100 hours.
You have never seen a bear?
Nope, never saw a bear once. That's crazy. Yeah,
I've seen them like way up high in the mountains of Hebra and like way down low in the forests right beside one of the first stables in the game by the Twin Peaks and stuff like.
Yeah, never saw one.
They're all over.
Well, I got unlucky, I guess. But anyway, I had never seen the Lord of the Mountain myself because I'm
going to do that tonight.
Well, don't count on it, Bally, because you're going to have to be doing a blood moon again where you reload night and day because it's just random when it appears. It was just lucky that when I was at Ali T's, we're basically just, he was exploring, we're just riding along Hyrule, and I spotted it was glowing. I'm like, holy shit. Try and get there.
It's glowing more often than a blood moon, though. I've seen it glowing a lot more.
I don't know. It depends where you are on the map, though, right? Because if you warp, I'm not sure if it retains that status or if it like disappears when you warp. So you'd have to like directly go there. But yeah, is
it just chilling there up the mountain when
it
you
is.
go there?
So you know the blue peas, the like sparkling rabbits, like one that always spawns near the fairy fountain at Kakariko.
Yeah.
There's just tons of those, like 10 or 15 of those surrounding this like majestic big one that stands in the center of them, and it's around this pond that has like sakura blossoms and everything. It feels like this is a very respectful kind of nod to Mystery Water, which I thought just generally was very awesome.
I need to see that.
Yeah, absolutely, it's worth checking out. So yeah, we've talked a lot about specific things we've liked and enjoyed. The dungeons themselves, we've talked a bit about them, but I felt that they could have gone further with them, personally. Like, I really like the idea of them, and I thought especially the Gerudo dungeon is one that is very clever, and it's the one that took me the longest, not only because I was learning how these dungeons worked, but also because it is by far the most complex. If they had maybe added some terminals, not had just 5, had maybe like 8 or 9, like made it just a bit longer, I felt would have added to that sense of being in a dungeon, because I didn't feel that way in the Rito one. It took me like 30 minutes to blast through, And in a 3D Zelda, I have expectations of dungeons being kind of bigger, more grandiose affairs. But
normally with a 3D Zelda, especially if you're looking at like a Twilight Princess or something, the gaming session you have when you pick up the controller is going to be just that dungeon. Like I would rarely say play a Twilight Princess dungeon and then go on playing another few hours. Like normally it's just like I've only got the mental space and the patience to play through this one dungeon, whereas with Breath of the Wild you'd play through the dungeon, then you'd be like, right, now let's go explore the world for another few hours. And like
I think Breath of the Wild maybe lends itself more to that stuff anyway, because it's
definitely
the kind of game where you just fall down a hole. But yeah, I agree. It's definitely, when it came to that, it was easy to just be like, oh, is that it? And blast through. But the one thing I did like about it was that the sense of space was the same in each of them. Like it was
when
built
you're inside the camel and it's moving along and you can just
look
out over the Gerudo Desert.
The first moment when I realized like it's still moving while I'm inside it and I saw the desert behind me, I was like, fucking holy shit, this video game.
Yeah.
And that was, talk about why Gerudo blew my mind, first of all. There's so many reasons, but that was a big one among them. Was not only was the dungeon really impressive, but like seeing it moving while I was there. I think the Rito is the same thing. Like all of them are the same thing, aside from the Goron one, which is just stuck in the lava. They're all kind of moving around while everything is happening. And that's a great sense of place. But unfortunately, you're not actually in the world when it does that. I think I mentioned when we talked about the Zora dungeon.
Do you think they could have done that, or is it just too difficult?
It might have been too difficult to load it all in, potentially. But the one thing that they struggle with, I think, particularly when it came to dungeons, was how do we differentiate these from shrines? Because you have the same powers going into the dungeons as you do the shrines. So ultimately, it has to be thought of more as a set of linked puzzles than standalone puzzles. And I don't think they necessarily nailed that every time, especially because, like the rest of this game, you can kind of do them in any order. So I don't know how they get around that for another game.
I think that they've always got, the the traditional long Zelda 3D dungeons that they can crutch on in the future if they want, and those dungeons would happily fit into this engine, to be honest, if they ever decide to go.
But would
that
they
way.
break the game or change the game, Bally? Because if you introduce one of those style of dungeons, it necessitates having a mid-dungeon item that you only obtain in that area, and then that predicates puzzles later on within that dungeon. I just don't know. I don't know, with the way this game is built and being so open, that would necessarily work.
It would break down a lot of things in the game, but imagine if with the 4 dungeons, one of the dungeons you got the bombs, the other dungeon you got stasis, the other dungeon you got magnesis.
Sure, but then that's kind of
cryonis.
That's limiting it so that when you're early in the game you can't do as much, right? That's the problem I have with it. And I think their compromise was to do the hero powers, which I thought was a neat one, because they're not necessary, but they are very, very helpful for the rest of the game. Especially when I fought the Goron boss, Fireblight Ganon, I didn't figure out that you had to use bombs when he was like sucking stuff in to get through that barrier, and I just basically used Urbosa's Fury because I had it at that point, and I basically just electrocuted him and destroyed him. So there are even with bosses ways to get around the patterns that they have designated for you, and that's the beauty of this game, is just circumventing everything. So. Yeah, I'm curious what they do with this bonus dungeon they do for the DLC, right? Because if it's just another, they've said it's another dungeon.
Okay.
If it's just another divine beast, I don't know that I'm that excited about it.
I can't see them doing a divine beast. Surely they're gonna mix it up.
Yeah, I mean, arguably the most traditional dungeon would be Hyrule Castle. I think Hyrule Castle is traditional in the sense that it feels much more like a Link to the Past dungeon, because it's basically combat encounters throughout it, right? So it kind of calls back to that era of the Zelda series. And I don't know that I like the idea of combat encounters making up the main part of a dungeon either. Because the funny thing about these dungeons in Breath of the Wild, actually, and the thing that makes them feel so different, is that in a normal Zelda dungeon, you have a breakup of combat rooms and puzzle rooms. And these were basically just puzzles. Like, the enemies you encounter in the Breath of the Wild dungeons are not very challenging enemies, and there are very few of them. So that's the thing that maybe they could add, is like more variety when it comes to that. But again, it's really difficult to figure out yourself out of this problem when Nintendo have made this fucking masterpiece of a game that, clearly we have problems with, but like, it's so difficult to look past what this game does well. Any side quests that you found particularly memorable as you were going along? Because I think a lot of them feel generic. There's that kid in Kakariko who wants the lizards for the girl or whatever. And there's also the guy you come across at the stable before Gerudo who wants 55 rushrooms. And I actually collected fucking 55 rushrooms for him. But it didn't feel worth it, It felt like very...
there's quite a few side quests that do feel quite... Not pointless is a strong word. It's so much less important and interesting than other parts of the game that you do wonder, like, why are they there? Like, you could have, I don't know. It's weird. I think that
just to fill gaps, I guess, really more than anything else.
Yeah. one side quest like I liked near the start of the game was I did all the Mount Lineru stuff, but like before I had any understanding of the dragons.
Sure.
And maybe while I'm talking about the dragons, I can mention like I've done a lot of dragon harvesting and upgrading my champion's tunic because
Yeah, I did not want to do that at all. It seemed like a grind, honestly.
I mean, for me, the dragons are just this incredibly spectacular part of this game, and I did have to look up some stuff as to like where they spawn and how you get them. And
did you not feel though that a lot of that mystery and stuff was taken away by you undergoing this process of harvesting them? Because once you do that, you know exactly where they are at all times, and like the first time I found the one that goes through the kind of south part of the map. I can't remember. It's the electric area.
Yeah. Lineru, not Lineru.
I don't remember its name. Farron, yeah, it is Farron, obviously. God, Farron Woods. I saw Farron, the dragon, or Farosh, I guess his name is.
Yeah, Farosh.
Like just going through a waterfall. I was like, what in the Jesus fuck is that? Like when you see that for the first time,
the first
it's
one
like,
you saw?
Yes, because I hadn't gone up Mount Lineru, so I just saw it just randomly in the world. It just fucking appeared in my face. I'm like, what the fuck is that? I thought it was a boss. I thought like that there was going to be a dungeon in that area. I was going to fight that as a boss, and it turns out no, they're kind of just like things that you grind off of, and you don't really do much else with them.
I was prepared to sacrifice the spectacle. I still got the spectacle of seeing them all. I wasn't.
I guess they just
about
lose their mystery, basically.
I'd already had the impact of the mystery of when they come about, and I had like through Mount Lineru discovered that you can shoot them for parts. Like I knew that you could do that.
Sure.
So all I was looking up was essentially where and how they come, and like I'd already seen all three of them.
Fair.
And it was just a case of I'm still enjoying the spectacle of seeing these like dragons, but knowing where and how they come doesn't ruin too much for me. I think it's fine, and I'd be I'm sure there are people who just refuse to look at a guide for anything in this game who probably have upgraded the champion's tunic to its top rate, but they probably also have done like 180 hours of this game, and like
or they're the people who wrote the guide of how to do that,
right? Exactly. So I just thought that I did want to upgrade the champion's tunic. It is the best tunic in the game, and I think that what's great about it is that whether you're going to like a cold area or a hot area, you can wear the champion's tunic and then just wear the headgear and leg gear, and you've got the benefits of, say, for example, going into a cold area and staying warm enough. And
sure.
So it was just, I just thought it looked cool as well, and I wanted to know more about the dragons and how they spawned and stuff, and just have that knowledge. Like it was just fun to have, essentially, and I didn't mind investing the extra time and effort to get all those parts, and they were actually really fun to get at times, because sometimes you need like specific horns, and you actually have to shoot the horn, which is really
right. There
tough.
is challenge involved in the specific areas.
Crazy challenge, because like the fire dragon, I've forgotten his name. It'll be something to do with Dinral. That's his name.
Dinral.
I like completely screwed up the timing on when to like jump off this cliff and glide after him. And I was just like, right, I'm going to have to respawn him. I will like reset it and do my fire again and get him back to respawn. And I was just like, I'll just shoot I'll hit and hope an arrow into the sky. So I just launched an arrow into the sky. And then I saw that it had hit, and I was like, all right, it's hit. I've probably got a scale. Like I'm after the horn.
Yeah.
I know I've got a scale. Let's just glide down and see it. And it's like, oh my God, it's an actual horn. And I had sniped to this guy from like,
it's pretty good,
way far away. And I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to do that again. So I got real enjoyment out of that aspect of it. So yeah, I think it was the dragons themselves are an incredible inclusion in the game, and I like that there are some really tough items and parts that you have to get to upgrade some of the stuff in this game, and I just wanted to experience that, because obviously the champion's tunic is probably the hardest thing to upgrade compared to most things.
Yeah, in terms of those parts, that was a thing that hit me when I first fought a Hinox, because I fought one really early in the game, like the first weekend, and when I beat it, I got a bunch of bullshit in terms of weapons. Like, it was holding a bunch of shit that I did not care about whatsoever. And then I realized, like, okay, these guts are going to be useful for upgrading stuff later. So that's the real reason you go after these monsters, is not for the loot they drop particularly, apart from Lionel's, which drop like all these arrows and some good bows and stuff, but generally for the stuff that the spoils, essentially. But the one thing about the dragons is I wish they tied them into the story somehow. Like, I think that's a missed opportunity as well, because I think they could have been doing some cool stuff. Like, when I think about stuff like Levius from Skyward Sword and the Great Sky Whale, and you know, there are dragons in Skyward Sword as well, which look really fucking weird. They don't look like dragons at all. But they're a big part of that story, and I kind of wish that maybe these had factored in somewhat. But maybe they're better off as just beasts. I don't know.
I mean, I had the impact of, you know, going up Mount Lanayru and being like, oh my god, that dragon. And like, obviously with you and Farosh, like, you're just like walking on like, oh my god, what
it was maybe
that?
like 10 hours into the game, because I had just gone south, and I was basically, I'd got to Hateno, and I basically was like, okay, I'm going to basically make my way across this entire jungle from left to right, or right to left, I guess, going to the like Gerudo side from there. And throughout my adventures just across that whole area, I just saw him multiple times. I was like, I have no idea what it is, what it means or anything, but man, this game is just, it keeps topping itself. And that was a big aspect of it. So are there some other things?
Final thoughts?
There's another shrine that I wanted to bring up that was the 7 heroines in the Gerudo Desert that I thought was just great,
did that one
in
as
terms
one of my final 20.
Scale, like the scale of just climbing those enormous statues.
It takes a while.
It does, but it just feels really epic. You know, it's very grandiose. And that's the thing that I like about this game, is like, the grandeur of it is something that you can tangibly interact with. Like, you can just walk along the faces. Like you can crawl along the nose of one of those statues if you want to. Like, that's an option you have, which I just think is really cool. As opposed to it just being decorative, it's also part of, you know, the structure and physicality of the game. So that was a fun one. Like, it's very simple. It's just like figure out where the orbs go based on the things. But there's a lot of
shapes.
Yeah, there's a lot of like figuring out where the thing is on each one of them. That's a really good one. And then related to that is the 8th heroine, because there's this guy who's like really, he basically wants to go out with one of the Gerudo women, but no one cares about him. And if you dress up as the Gerudo in the outfit, basically you go up to him. He's like, "Oh my god, will you do this for me? And I'll give you my boots." And you go off to find the 8th heroine, which is somewhere in the Gerudo Highlands.
I've actually found that heroine. I just haven't done the side quest.
Have you taken a picture of it?
No.
Okay, that's another thing. The photo taking aspect of this game, which I don't think I really engaged with that much.
Yeah,
a lot of people enjoyed, but you should have been taking photos of a lot of stuff, because taking a picture of that thing, if you take it back to him, he'll be like, "Oh shit, here you go." And the rewards from him are really good. You get snow boots and sand boots, which basically allow you to walk at normal speed through snow and sand, respectively, which is fantastic. And the other part of the quest is like, where's the missing blade? Because there's a giant sword that's just like stuck in the Gerudo Highlands. And if you take a picture of that and give it to him, he'll give you the other boots.
Oh, sweet. But, I saw that as well. That's annoying.
Yeah, if you're taking pictures of them, you've got some cool stuff, some cool useful items. But that is how it is sometimes. So should we read some emails before we kind of give our last kind of thoughts on the game?
So, we have an email from B King, who's from Sweden, who says, "The best thing about this game, in my opinion, is how it has changed the way I think of gaming. It no longer feels like a written story out of a book where you, the protagonist, are forced to complete certain missions in a particular order. You are free to go wherever you'd like and do whatever you want to do, and somehow they still manage to have a story. This really gives me, the player, a sense of being able to explore something a lot of games are promising but never really delivered, like I feel this game has. The world no longer has boundaries. The only boundary is yourself. There is nothing stopping you from going into a specific area. You can choose to sneak around and try to get through that way, or you can try to be the most skilled person ever by trying to kill 6 guardians with a stick. The choice is yours. And that may be the greatest thing about this game, that it gives you so many options and then lets you choose what you want to do and lets you use your imagination in such an amazing way. Greetings from Sweden, B King."
Yeah, I think that basically nails why people have connected so much with this game, is that in a world where your traditional AAA open world stuff is so rote in terms of, the kind of we joke about the Ubisoft kind of the Ubisoftification of their franchises, where everything is
and
the
this
same.
game still has its towers.
It does, but here's the thing: is like the towers in this game act as a means to see the topography and nothing else, and there is no vomiting of icons on the map, and that is its biggest strength, I think. And I think that Definitely. Is a fantastic design decision from Nintendo, that they allow the player to just learn the world and to get familiar with it. And a lot of that is down to the fact that the world is very unique in the way it's designed, and that almost anywhere in the world that you stand, I could probably identify just from seeing a screenshot of it. But you can't really do that in other games. And I've played like 20 or so hours of Horizon Zero Dawn, which I haven't talked about on the podcast yet, but I'll finish when I get back home. And put me in a place in that game and I can't tell you anything about it or anywhere it is in that world, because it all just looks the same. It just looks like grass and trees, and the environments change in terms of their geography and that stuff, but it doesn't have the Disney style, I can't remember what the word is for it, Bally, but like, the where you can see something from all these different places, and
forced perspective.
Yeah, those kind of perspectives, they just don't matter in games like Horizon or Assassin's Creed or anything like that, and Zelda makes it matter for that reason.
What I find incredible is that, having only played a handful of open world games, stuff like Assassin's Creed 4 is maybe the biggest one that I played before this game. I've obviously not played many open world games in comparison to you, MBZ. So when I was like in the first 20 hours of this game being like, oh my god, this is the best thing, this is the best open world game ever, like it's doing all these cool things, I was worried that a lot of the joy I was getting was just a joy that many other open world games could still give you.
Right.
And that's when, speaking with you, and you were like just as flabbergasted by this game as me, I was like, wow, it's really doing something. If someone like you, who's played, The Witcher 3, and like you said, Horizon, what's the
Zero Dawn.
Zero Dawn, there we go.
The surname, yes. Hello, Mr. Horizon.
Hello, Mr. Zero Dawn. I was really impressed that this game went above and beyond your interpretation of what made a good open world game.
Sure.
And
I think there are definitely aspects that Zelda is weak about. Like, the narrative is one thing that The Witcher 3 I don't think is going to be top for a while. Like, side quests are so meaningful in Witcher 3. They are incredibly well written, and you get so invested in them. And that the story of Witcher 3 is one that I really adore and think just does excellently. And that world is still really marvelous to explore, but there's no tangibility in Witcher 3 like there is in Zelda. Like, Witcher 3 is a little janky, it comes off as like you can jump over fences if you can, like kind of glitch through stuff, like trying to glitch up mountains and stuff. It doesn't feel like it's intended at all by the developers. Whereas Zelda, the world is built for the player to touch, and that's the big thing about it.
It's just, it does. So many people have said so many great things about this game, and it's hard to top it all off. It's just made such a big impact on, like Beking said, like how I think about video games, and it's you're given so much control over where to go and what to do, and that's not just at a grand overworld, open world scale. That's including when you're back to a wall in a shrine trying to think, how on earth am I going to do this sort of thing, like the way that you defeat enemies, how are you going to do it, how do you avoid this Lionel, how do you get up that mountain, like the variety and choice and ability you have to make those choices is at every single level of this game, maybe once you're off the Great Plateau, arguably. And then it's just anything you want to do.
Yeah, it is. It's very much built around that, and that kind of gameplay creates player stories, which we have one of from Austin, who writes in and says, "My story began when I arrived on the shores of Eventide Island on the southeast corner of the map. This is, this is a place that a lot of people have talked about. I don't know if we mentioned Eventide Island at all, Bally." But
we
can talk about it regarding this email. Anyway, he says, upon arrival, I was greeted by a message from a shrine elder offering me a challenge in which I was stripped of all my equipment, weapons, clothes, food, and all. The only thing left to my name was a trusty Sheikah slate. The goal was to acquire 3 orbs and return them to their corresponding altars using only what the island could offer. It started off simple enough. After collecting some local fruit, I headed to a bokoblin camp, slaying them with a handful of tree branches and returning their orb to its altar. The next orb would pose a much greater challenge, as it was adorned on the neck of a blue hinox. After cooking a few attack-buffing meals and raiding a few more bokoblin camps for some basic weapons using my unlimited supply of bombs, I was ready to face him. After a few spears to the eye, the hinox fell, granting me my second orb. The final orb was located at the top of a small mountain guarded by some bokoblin and a moblin. They went down easy due to my lingering attack buff, and the final orb was in my hands ready to be returned to its altar. The only problem was that the altar was covered by a giant stone slate. Seeing this, I set the orb down on a small triangle of stone so I could remove this stone. My initial thought was to use magnesis, but it was not magnetic. Then I tried to blow it up using bombs, and then a nearby explosive barrel to no avail. I then remembered to try my stasis ability, and after a few swings the stone went flying. Success, I thought, until I turned around to see my precious orb missing. It was then that my worst fears were realized. The orb had rolled down the mountain from the explosion and fallen into the water. I descended the mountain and began using my cryonis ability to lift the orb from the water so I could bring it back to shore. It was a tedious process until I had the brilliant idea of throwing the orb, then making new ice pillars under it and repeating. When I finally reached the shore, I was presented with another problem, getting the orb onto shore without it rolling back into the ocean. After many failures, things got worse. It began to rain. I continued my desperate attempt to throw the orb up the slippery slope until the entire Zelda universe gave me a big fuck you and hit me with a lightning bolt. This was a blessing in disguise, however, as it hurled the orb from my hands and back onto shore without it rolling back into the water. I was then presented with one final challenge: carry the orb up the mountain with no clear path. If the slope was even slightly too steep, Link would drop the orb and I would have to chase it down the hill and repeat. After countless failed attempts, I finally had a brilliant idea. I climbed as high as I could without dropping the orb and wedged it between the cleavage of the mountain. I then used stasis on the orb and began desperately whacking it, breaking several boko clubs. Time returned, and the orb went catapulting up the mountain, landing safely at the top where it needed to be. My challenge was complete. As much of an infuriating experience as it was, it made me appreciate the fact that this couldn't happen in any other game. It was an experience straight out of an island survival movie. I hope this isn't too long or long-winded to read, so I understand. Anyways, thanks for reading and keep up the great work, guys. Well, hell of a story, Austin, and one that I think a lot of players can relate to, especially with Eventide Island, because it's one of those moments in the game where you're like, oh my god, like it just hits you, and you realize like everything you have learned has to be turned on its head, and you have to basically go back to basics and take on this really difficult challenge. How did you deal with it, Bally?
I just distinctly remember everyone freaking out about Eventide Island. Have you been to Eventide Island? And I just knew that Eventide Island was a thing people were freaking out about. I didn't know the reason for it. I saw the island in the sort of southeasternmost point of my map and thought that might be Eventide Island. I'll try gliding there. And then, yeah, the second that, you know, you land and then you're stripped of everything and you're like, wow, here we go. I struggled quite a lot with it. I died a few times. I got caught by the hinox a few times and killed. I found it really, really hard.
Where were you in the game when you got there? Because the first time I did, I was actually on Skype with you, and I was like, I had like 7 hearts. I was like really low level.
7?
Yeah, I got there and I had basically nothing, and I died real quickly. And then, for whatever reason, it hadn't auto-saved me nearby, so I was way back in the seaside village. Because basically, I had set out from the seaside village on a raft and just kept rafting along, and basically just stumbled into it. And then I was like, oh, I'll go back there later. So I came back actually, Eventide Island was the last shrine I got in the entire game. So I came back right at the very end, because it had been sitting there forever, and I knew it was there. So I waited until the very end to do it, and it was my last one.
I did it when I got there, and I sort of did a big sweep of everything. If you're going clock, if you imagine it as a clock, the map, sure. I went everything from Hateno all the way around to Gerudo, but not including Gerudo. I did that entire sweep of the map after I did the Goron dungeon, just because I knew that that was the area of the map that didn't fit into my plan of doing all the dungeons anti-clockwise, essentially. So sure. I went back and swept that area, and then including in that was Eventide Island, and I'm just so glad that that exists, and I am so glad that they went back to that idea with the DLC, with Trial of the Sword. And I've only tried it once, and I did pretty badly. I think I failed on the 4th level. I simply was being stealthy, tried to fight some bokoblins. I tried to sneak up on them, but obviously without my stealth gear. I've not done much stealthy stuff in this game without stealth gear. I've realized I'm really bad at it. So whenever I'm not wearing stealth gear, I always get caught.
Got to pay attention to that sound meter at the bottom.
Yeah, true. But when you're looking at the sound meter, you can't look at the main screen. I don't know. I just kept getting caught. But I'm gonna go back to that, and it's really good that aspect of survival is in this game, and that they actually brought it back, because Eventide Island took me a few attempts, and I actually did a number of things with the lightning, and I'm so glad that they have the lightning on that level, because I was like throwing metal objects at bokoblins,
right,
and using the lightning to kill them.
That was the first shrine quest that I ever found, was the one in the south of the map where you have to basically use lightning to open up the shrine by hitting the mound of dirt, essentially. So I threw the sword on top, and that was when I discovered that. That was really cool. For me, Eventide Island was... I kind of knew what the challenge was going to be because I'd already been there. But I'd learned a lot by the time I got there. So I had watched, when the game had just come out, Brad Shoemaker of Giant Bomb did like a couple of hour stream of Breath of the Wild. And something that the chat had told him was, if you go up to a Hinox and stealthily just sit on its hand, the Hinox like moves its hand up to its belly, like
I did that a few times, and I got caught, which was frustrating because I'd get the orb, but then it would obviously wake up, and it's just a case of running away from it. And
so it did wake up for me as well, but I just ran as fast as I could and managed to get the orb up there. The funny thing was, when I got up to that bokoblin camp just above the Hinox, I had nothing basically, so I was like really just trying to kill them with whatever I could, and it got down to this last blue bokoblin, and the only thing that I had around me was a rock. So I basically was picking up this rock and like trying to throw it at him and missing, and throw it, and he literally had like one sliver of health, and eventually this rock just hit him square in the face and he died. So that was like just me grasping at every straw to finally get a win, and I did. But
I managed to get the Hinox all the way to the top of the hill on the southeast point. There was a reason I wanted them up there. I can't remember it now. I think there were like some bomb barrels up there or something, and I just wanted him near them so I could chuck them at him more easily or something. I don't know.
They're like boulders above him as well. You can roll down into his face. And I was kind of trying to use those against the bokoblins as well, like hiding behind them, then stasising, then hitting, and it wasn't working because they were too fast for me to pull it off. But it's a great part of the game. It's a really cool, unique area, and also a nice throwback to Link's Awakening, because there are parts of that island that are named after Link's Awakening, and the whole idea of Link just washing up on an island with nothing is the entire premise of Link's Awakening. Just a neat nod overall. And that game is good at doing that stuff. Like, there are just nods everywhere. The map is just littered with
I think
names.
Game explained a video explaining lots of the nods that I'm going to just go back and watch.
Yeah, that's a good one. It definitely brings up a lot of interesting stuff. Yeah, I think that's probably going to wrap us up here, Val. We've done a good 90 minutes of chat about Breath of the Wild. Anything to close it out? Any final thoughts you have about the game generally?
Just that it's so much better than what I thought it was going to be. I think that everyone's just like, oh, of course it's good. It's Zelda and it's open world. This game goes far beyond just blending Zelda with open world. It
redefines what open world means.
Exactly. I think the fact that it does have the Zelda brand behind it helps.
Of course it does. Like, I don't deny that this game wouldn't have been... I think it would have got critical praise if it hadn't been a Zelda game.
But it might have been a bit more niche, perhaps.
Sure.
Like, the Zelda name definitely opens it up to a mainstream audience,
right,
especially with it launching on Switch and stuff like that. But it brings... When people play games like Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and you're just like, oh, I just wish the world was bigger and there was more depth to kind of how this all links together. This game just provides that depth and that sort of, oh, you can go up this mountain, and the name Breath of the Wild really is emphasized in the gameplay, in the sense that how you interact with the wild and the wilderness and survive aspects, especially early on in the game, shapes a lot of how you traverse this world and the decisions that you make and where you go forward.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of an astonishing achievement that Nintendo, having had minimal experience making games of this genre, took some lessons from, Western design with like side quest logs and stuff like that, and waypoints. They're all
very welcome that they
yeah,
keep
absolutely
some traditions in there.
Yeah, and I think they needed to, because a lot of those are conveniences that people just kind of expect these days in games. But taking that, but then adding their own unique source to it, with the ability to climb on everything and the physics and chemistry engines working together in this beautiful synchronicity that creates these wonderful moments of player agency. It's just unlike anything else that we've seen before on this scale. Because, people like to compare this game to Far Cry 2, which was a game that had that kind of weird, like, knock-on effects of things affecting one another. But when it comes to like the budget and, attention and polish of a Nintendo game and just AAA games in general, I don't think a game like this has ever been released with, that much put behind it. So it is a real achievement in that sense. And it is a video game that in 25 years, okay, maybe let's say 18 years of playing video. I'm trying to think when I started playing video games. Let's say 20 years
when
of playing.
You were one?
Yeah. In 20 years of playing video games, thereabouts, I haven't felt magic like this playing a game since Pokemon Blue, which was my first like real video game that I ever played. And that is something that, you can be as nitpicky as you like about the combat, and, maybe some of the graphics don't hold up, and there are some things that people get annoyed about, but you can't argue with magic. That's something that is indefinable. It's something that is intangible, and the first few like hours I had with this game were something fucking else, and I am astounded at how good it is, and how entrancing it is.
Let up at all for me. Like, although it took me an absolutely very long time to beat, there weren't points where I was like, I've played a lot of Breath of the Wild. I don't know if I can play much more. Like, I didn't feel that. Even after beating the final shrine, I was like, there's just so much more I want to do in this game. I never got tired of being in that world and playing the game. There are plenty of games that have slow points where I'm like, I just want to get this bit done so I can get onto the good stuff. That just never happened in this game.
The good stuff is everything.
The good stuff is everything, and every single option you have to do is good. Even the dungeons, as different and unique as they are, I love the fact that they are a bit different and unique, and they are still really fun to do. And the fact that they're quite short, of course, makes it even more streamlined. But everything is fun to do. Everything has a touch of magic when it comes to it. And then there are obviously the real special moments that just really make this game head and shoulders above most other games, you could say.
Yeah, you could say. The thing that I keep coming back to is Bill Trinan was on an episode of Nintendo Voice Chat, like maybe a year before the game came out, or maybe it was around E3 of last year. And he was saying, like, telling the crew about how he would just, like, ride for hours and hours in Hyrule. And I was like, Like, I started forming this image in my head of how huge and open this game was. I was like, there's no way it's actually, like, that big. Because I was just thinking,
because we'd already seen sort of, like, that, what was it? What was the screening we shot at sort of the Game Awards, wasn't it? Where
the
they
map.
were, like, riding through this field, and it was like, right, that's Link on a horse riding through a fairly big world.
Yeah.
Doesn't look too special, but fair enough.
And you know, I just keep coming back to that and thinking, like, because in my head I just had imagined what this game could potentially be. Every time I imagine what games can potentially be, they never live up to it, right? There is no way they ever meet the expectations of my imaginations, and somehow Zelda does. Like, that's the most mind-blowing thing to me, is that when I think about, like, riding through this endless open world, Zelda isn't endless, but by God, it comes close to giving you that feeling of that I could ride forever through this, like, grassland. You know, it is. Yeah. It's crazy that they achieved that, and I'm glad they did, because this is
me too.
A fucking incredible game, and we just talked about it for a long time.
We're going to talk about this game so much more on this podcast and reference it. You know, there's a handful of games we always reference on this podcast. This is now top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a benchmark going forward, not just for the Zelda series, but like all of video games, kind of, in a way. I'm very intrigued to see if developers will take cues from Breath of the Wild going forward, you know. I think a lot of people expected that people would take stuff like the Nemesis system from Shadow of Mordor, and then 3 years later, no one's actually used it in another game, and the sequel to Shadow of Mordor is coming out. So I don't know if we'll be in a situation where that happens, because ultimately, and this was interesting because the Shadow of Mordor guys were on the Giant Bomb Couch, and Jeff asked them about, like, why did you think that no one else has done it? And they were like, well, maybe people thought about doing it, and then they tried to, and they realized this is way too fucking hard. We're not even going to bother with this. And my thought is that with Zelda, developers might consider doing it, and then they'll look at it and be like, fuck, this is really hard. How do we even make this work? So maybe it unfortunately won't, just because of, you know, the nature of Nintendo first party and their incredible polish, and the fact that they're allowed the time and the budget to go in on a project like this. I just don't think other AAA developers are afforded the same leniency, especially on the third party end. But I'd love to see elements.
Company have done the number of delays Nintendo did, for example. Like,
right.
Nintendo can get away with murder when it comes to stuff like that. So
yeah.
We're always going to be more patient for, you know, the industry kings.
Absolutely. Well, Bally, let's close it out then. Where can people find you on the internet?
Please find me on Twitter. I am at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. Also, please follow the podcast Twitter account, which is at TNL Podcast. That is at TNL Podcast. Excellent.
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Lordnbz. And you can find this podcast in various places. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, we're on any podcasting app that you own. Just look us up and download us, ThisNintendoLife. And you can also review us on iTunes, which would be very nice and helpful, and we'd really appreciate if you do that. You can also send us emails, like some of the fine folks who sent us emails on this episode. Bally, where can they send those to?
Please send your emails to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We are always needing more.
We are indeed. So look forward to that. Let's get out of here, Bally. Let's go play some Splatoon 2 Splatfest, which is going on right now. So I'm excited to jump into that. And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode of this fine podcast. Hope you guys enjoy. Until then, goodbye, everyone.